Hey guys, I'm making this video today because I've noticed something rather alarming, and that's that in today's tech-oriented, science-oriented world, pop culture and the media has labeled religious people, and really religion in general, as being unscientific and just not academically credible. And beyond our media, the people often hold to the notion that we just need to keep science with science and religion with religion, and that the two mix really as well as oil and water. And so I decided to make a video to really evaluate these different religious worldviews from an academic perspective. So before I start, I want to really offer a definition of worldview. Now, a worldview is an intellectual lens through which people view reality. This means that everyone has one. So here is one of the first questions we really need to consider, and that's, is there only one correct worldview, or are they all equally true? In order to objectively answer this, we need to find a common starting point at which to evaluate any worldview. What can they all agree on? We find this first step filter in what are known as the first principles. Now, first principles are the fundamental assumptions underlying any academic pursuit. As Aristotle said, they are the foundations of all knowledge. These principles are self-evident. Now, the key principles we can use to evaluate worldviews are the law of non-contradiction and the law of identity. The law of non-contradiction states that two opposing ideas cannot both be true at the same time in the same sense, and any attempt to deny this principle is self-defeating, as one must use it in order to deny it. And then the law of identity basically states that you just need to define your terms. So let's go back and apply these first principles to our first question, whether or not there's only one true worldview. Now, this question basically boils down to this issue of absolute truth. Are there certain truths that are universal, transcendent, and unchanging? This is opposed to the relativist belief that truth is relative, dependent upon the individual, the culture, etc. Now, in the light of the law of non-contradiction, when a relativist says that relativism is true, he automatically assumes that there is an opposite worldview, that opposite worldview being absolute truth, and that worldview must be false. Now, to give an example, say I'm a relativist, and I say, all truth is personal. Now, someone might come up to me and respond, well, is that view personally true for you alone, or is it true for me and everybody else as well? Now, the reason this is key is because the original statement, the statement, all truth is personal, asserts that all truth is relative, all truth is personal, except the belief that there is no absolute truth, which is itself an absolute statement. Additionally, the relativist probably believes his view is better than another man's view that there is no absolute truth, but whenever the word better is used, it implies a standard, without which nothing could be better or worse, just different. Now, applying this same chain of logic to the claim regarding absolute truth surfaces no such contradictions. So moving forward, we'll be applying these first principles to the two major tenets of any worldview, the origin of the cosmos and the nature of morality. In this way, we can objectively analyze the evidence without the bias of a presupposed worldview, aiming to determine which worldview is most credible or reasonable. Now, to begin this analysis, or evaluation, let's discuss the cosmos. Now, when most people say origins, they're talking about the beginning of life or species. But I want to look behind that. I want to look to true origins, to the origins of the cosmos. So the universe exists. How? Well, there are three ways the universe could exist. Either it always existed, it created itself, or it was created. So then, has the universe always existed? Well, in order to answer this, we must turn to physics. Now, in physics, we observe that all things are decaying. This fact is known as the second law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of entropy. And I don't have a ton of time, and I do have a lot to cover in this video, so I'm going to go through this really briefly, but if you do want to learn more about this, I will put a link in the description. So, to put it as simply as I can, the second law of thermodynamics states that organized things tend to become disorganized over time. The study of thermodynamics as a whole deals with the movement of energy, and the second law states that whenever energy is exchanged, a tiny little bit seeps out. This is well demonstrated by Newton's cradle. Now sure, they're very efficient when they transfer their energy, but the balls will not bounce forever, and eventually all of the energy will escape. In this case, it escapes in the form of heat due to friction, and there will eventually be no more movement. Now this law is true for literally every finite thing, and for all living things, even humans. What happens when something stops eating? Well, stops putting more energy into its body? Well, it dies. And what happens when it dies? All the energy built up into his body, the energy that's keeping him together, it seeps out and the body slowly rots into a pile of mush. Now this is true for the universe as well. The universe is not getting more orderly, it's slowly rotting away. So if the universe had been around forever, it would be a pile of mush by now. But what about a god? Well, he's not subject to the second law of thermodynamics, and here's why. A god is an infinite being, and that means that he's not limited by anything, including time. Now, if you recall, the second law of thermodynamics states that organized things tend to become disorganized over time. Without time, we have no loss of organization. And it's also worth noting that an infinite being, such as a god, has infinite energy, meaning that it would never run out, no matter how much it lost. Now, if that's not enough to convince you, a group at Princeton predicted that there would be residual microwave background radiation left over from a Big Bang. This prediction was confirmed by two men by the names of Arno A. Penzias and Robert W. Wilson, who received the Nobel Prize in 1978 for their discovery. Now, what is the significance of this? Well, it is without a doubt evidence towards the Big Bang, as the pattern of wavelengths are exactly what was predicted for the light and heat produced by a catastrophic explosion. Now, this is key because the principle of causality, sometimes taught as cause and effect, states simply that every effect must have a cause. Basically, stuff just doesn't happen without a reason. This is actually quite intuitive, but begs the question, what caused the Big Bang then? Some would say that it was caused by another universe, but this only delays the question as we will eventually begin to wonder, well, what caused that? In the end, or rather the beginning, things must have been caused by something infinite, either an infinite being or an infinite number of finite beings, which is an infinite cause. If science says that the universe did not always exist, did it create itself, or was it created? As I said, the universe is caused. We know this because it exists, and we know that it had a beginning. And because of this, it logically follows that it was caused. So did it cause itself? Well, no. In order to cause itself, it would have to simultaneously exist to cause itself, and not exist to be caused. This is a clear and obvious contradiction, and quite frankly, it's nonsense. So, the universe was created, and more than that, it was created by something infinite. Sounding a lot like a theistic universe now, isn't it? So here we are, having come to the conclusion that an infinite cause is the most probable cause of the universe. We must operate under the assumption that whatever force created the universe must be an intelligent being to be capable of creating a universe that is governed by its own laws of physics, rather than a mindless force. Couldn't this being just have been someone who created the universe, like setting a top in motion, and has nothing more to do with us? Why should we think that this being is a personal, moral being with a standard for his creation to follow? This brings us to the idea of absolute morality, and the launching question, why do Christians think this being cares about how we run our lives? Now there are two options when it comes to morality, and only two. There's natural law and there's positive law. Natural law says that there are moral laws that transcend nature, an absolute standard, because they are rooted in this creator of the universe. Conversely, positive law states that moral laws are determined by people based on culture, time, and situation, and as it's created by humans, human authority is the end-all. Why should it be natural law instead of positive law? Well, do we use reason to determine moral laws, or do we use reason to discover them? There's an instinctual knowledge in the subconscious concerning a moral standard. To put that simply, there's a sense in everyone which tells us something is right or wrong. You can say that sense is instinctual. Self-preservation or preserving young are animal instincts. But what about when you shouldn't do the safe option, like saving someone you don't even know from being hit by a car when you have your own family to care for? Think about that. How can your instincts tell you to ignore your instincts because it's the right thing to do? That falls into the is-ought fallacy. Now, the is-ought fallacy is when we ascribe a moral prescription, how we ought to behave, when we say we don't. We can say what is, like people have lifestyles, but the minute you use ought, like you ought not judge someone else's lifestyle, you're appealing to a rule that I should follow. You can't call something or someone absolutely wrong unless you think there's an absolute right, any more than you can call a line crooked if you have no idea what a straight line looks like, or any more than you'd know what colors were if everybody was colorblind. That is a violation of logic. Now, the problem with laws determined by governments is actually its very definition when it's laid out for what it is. And human authority, aka governments, determine right and wrong. What happens when you apply that to actual real events? Well, the first international trial concerning human rights, the Nuremberg trials, brought criminal charges against the Nazi leaders for crimes against humanity. The Nazi defense was actually based upon their own laws determined by their government, and their defense is solid. Under the laws of Nazi Germany, we can have nothing to say about their actions since their government declared it was right, because human rights do not exist if the government says they don't. Now, the ruling of those trials established, with some of the finest minds in jurisprudence, that there is a transcendent moral standard. The Declaration of Independence and civil rights would be meaningless without an absolute standard. You cannot call someone's morals better than others if there is no real morality, any more than you can say someone's drawing of a map is better than your own unless you have a reference for what the country should look like. When logic is applied, absolute morality, a transcendent standard to which we are held, is the logical next step in the light of theism.